Okay, what next? Glossed over when we skipped a couple steps from the drilling operation was this clearance plane tab. Now, this is why it's important that you don't have stray geometry in your model, because this clearance plane right now looks correct. What the clearance plane is the safe height that the bit's going to go to and move around above your material. You don't want it to be too high because the machine can't go that high, and it can also waste time. So the default is shrunk wrap about 1/4 inch, exactly 1/4 inch above your model. If it doesn't look like it's there, you can set it there with the absolute Z for the clearance plane. It's better to have a clean model and do it automatically. Cut levels. This is where you actually have to measure your material and see how thick it is. So I listed 0.72 for the thickness of the plywood, which is sometimes how thick plywood is, but I don't know if you're going to be able to see this. That says 0.681 inches. So I'm dealing with slightly thinner plywood here. That total depth of your cut, you need to go a little bit farther from. So if it's 0.681, I'm going to say 0.7. That's about 2/100ths more for my cut. In the tutorial, you see it does about 100th. You can do 2/100ths to be safe, which is only a 32nd of an inch, so it's not much that we're talking about. It's important that you don't go too far below because you can want to cut into the table, which is annoying to the people who take care of the machine, but it can also cause problems in your cuts. So 0.68 was my measured material. I'm going to put 0.7 for my total cut depth. Now, if I just ran the file, click Generate Now, it would cut all the way through my material 0.7 inches in one pass. A little bit that is only 1/4 inch cannot stand up to that sort of abuse, so we have to step down gradually with all of our cuts. The rule of thumb is that stepping down and also stepping over, when we get to that later, can be done safely in 50% of the bit diameter increments. So if you have a bit that's 1/4 inch, 0.25 inches, your safe starting point for thinking about a step down is half of that, which is 1/8 of an inch, or 0.125 inches. The way that it asks you to put that step down into this cut levels dialog is a little bit weird, but the quick and dirty way is that you just put your step down in this rough depth cut tab, and you're done. Why this exists next to a finish depth cut is that it gives you the option of splitting up your downward passes into bigger ones as rough passes and then smaller ones for finish passes. Sometimes you want to really claw through material really fast, take big chunks out, and then take a really dainty bite to have a clean finish on the end. That is useful sometimes, but for us, if you just step down at a half of the diameter of the bit, it'll work fine. So keep this top slider all the way to the right, and then just put your step down into this rough depth cut parameter there. This is really helpful because it explicitly asks you to talk about your total depth that you're going to cut and how much you're going to step down. Other operations do it automatically for you. That's why learning this one is actually better. Entry, exit, turn them off. For some reason, by default in RhinoCam, they are on. They will not help us most of the time. If we're putting a really fine finish on something, we might consider them, but just turn them off. Advanced cut parameters is where you can put little tiny bridges of material to hold your thing that you cut out back to the piece. So in the laser cutter, it doesn't really matter because the pieces are so small and the cut is so small, they don't really go anywhere. But in the CNC, it is ultimately important to hold your material to itself so it doesn't fly apart. You can get away with not doing tabs in plywood sometimes, but for the purposes of this assignment, let's do it. So I like rectangular tabs. I'm going to say if my material is 0.7 or whatever, 0.68 inches deep, do a bridge height, or tab height of 1/4 of an inch, 1/2 an inch wide, and then do 2 of them as it says on each piece. I just clicked generate, and what you get and what your preview should look like is something like this. A bunch of concentric, or not concentric, perfectly stacked on top of each other lines with gaps for the tabs in the bottom. And what you're seeing here is a preview of what the tool is going to do. So it just shows you the whole line that it draws in space. So if I switch to a front view, you can see it's going to come down and by 1/8 of an inch off, and then do the next, and do the next, and do the next. Your files should look something like this. You should not see big red lines jumping up high off of your curves. You should not see lines going outwards or anywhere else far off the material. And they should be on the correct side of the curve that you want to cut. So remember that we want to cut these circles out. We want to take this material out from the larger piece, so those lines should be on the inside.